an excellent tool.
The bottom, this is what happened.
I messed that up.
Just this
last one.
The last one, and then the middle one is for the
Yeah.
top.
So, I struggle with this. About 10% of my business is from the government. I've seen some benefits definitely in terms of the government thinking new, thinking different. When I say government, I mean generally the public sector and stuff that is directly influenced by either government funding or government owned and so on, like the states and the counties and the cities and so on. As much as I've seen benefits there, I've also seen some real idiosyncrasies there, which just got me to believe, I don't care which country I am in, they all have a particular common denominator across the board. Not to say that it is bad, it is just that it is a unique characteristic. So let me go through some of the things, good and bad, that I've gone through. First of all, most definitely government does encourage innovation. I like the phrase that Ashwin used today about, innovation is, are you willing to, set foot on the slippery, mossy mountain? Innovation is, are you willing to step out where nobody dared, or get into paths that were not created, and so on. So my answer to that is no, government doesn't do that. They don't necessarily find new paths and sort of paths that have not been trodden and all that. They typically do that only when they are pushed to the wall. So actually, I would like to add another definition to what Ashwin said, which is, will you walk on the mossy path when there is a regular path available? Only then that's innovation, because whenever there is a regular path available, the government, I believe, will actually go the regular path. It's the only time, for instance, they actually did innovation was during the Great Recession, and after that, when everybody was under huge budgetary constraints because everybody was into deficit financing, then there was a diktat that went down to across all departments, across all states, counties, cities, public institutions, universities, etc., saying cut the costs and generate savings. And so that's one of the big factors that I'll talk about, where it turned out to be an innovation, but it was forced innovation. The other thing is what I call as social dividend, which is what I associate this Obamacare all about, which again we'll talk about that later again, in terms of the Affordability Care Act and what does that spawn in terms of activities and both within the state and within the government as well as outside in terms of the private sector, which is really the third part, which is enabling the multipliers. Oops, how do I go back to the previous slide? Yeah, I got it.
You got it?
I got it.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I talked about this post-Great Recession, what I call as forced innovation. Until then, considering how long insurance for employees and employees' families have been there in place, it's unbelievable that nobody really thought of checking out on the eligibility of dependents on a plan. Okay, just to give you an idea, on an average, 10% of between 5 to 10% of the dependents under U.S. employees have been actually pretty much ineligible. To give you an idea, if there are let's say 200 million who are insured totally, including dependents, we're talking about close to 20 million who should not have been there in the first place, whether they are undocumented workers or they are grandchildren who've been passed off as children or whatever else it is, or the divorced wife who still continues to be on the plan and so on and so forth. Now that 20 million translates to something like, 20 million times 4,000. That's like $80 billion is what is being spent, which potentially could be saved. And that's exactly what happened in very quick time, in 2 years' time, when this particular recession took place. So for instance, that's a case where the government actually helped encouraged innovation. We ourselves did audits for over half a dozen states, many counties, cities, and so on. And across the board, typically, savings have been to the tune of 10% in terms of their total costs, which has been a big plus for them. But again, it comes back to why didn't they think of doing that before? The other thing is on what I call as social dividend, which is, incidentally, everything I'm talking about is related to healthcare because that's the area where I've actually interacted, where I actually operate, so I can quote some numbers there. And just using it as an example. In the case of the social dividend part of it, if you look at it, all this was done as part of a political exercise at the time of campaigning and so on, saying positioning-wise that we would like to give better medical care to more people, lower cost, more affordable, and so on and so forth. That was the essence of Affordable Care Act. What that created after that was generation of public exchanges. Now this is truly innovation because it actually generated scenarios and situations where people had to create all this, which is all great. But then there were things like IRS also now has to start tracking compliance of Affordable Care Act by employers. And the funny thing is, first of all, this entire ACA, as everybody knows, got shifted by a year because nobody was ready. And public exchanges were not ready, and companies were not ready, the government was not ready. But having then moved that, even today, the general belief amongst most folks is IRS is in no position to track ACA at this point of time, given where their structure is and their system is and their priorities are. And then on top of it, there is greater and greater focus in today's context in terms of coordination of benefits. What it means is if you, as a family, there are two people working and both of them have two different insurance policies, it becomes especially relevant in self-insured policies. Will the government ensure, if one of them is a government employee, do they ensure that if the other person is the primary insurer, that they do not get charged for what's being spent in the family thing before they actually hit the other insurance company? Again, in a way, it's an offshoot of that eligibility audit. A lot of savings there. But again, all this has come out. Unlike in the case of the budgetary case, in this particular case, I would say definitely there's more innovation to it because it was more political when it started off. But the actual execution of it is something where there's still a huge gap. Lastly, enabling multipliers. While the government may not have whatever policies it takes or whatever decisions it takes, one part of it is what does it do on its own in terms of generating innovation, but the other part is what does that do in terms of spawning a lot of innovation in the marketplace. And I think some of the things that we have definitely seen in this space which have happened in the recent past is a mushrooming of private exchanges across the board. I mean, virtually every company which is in the benefits administration space now is tying up with one exchange or the other. That's a huge innovation that's happened. ACA compliance tracking. Until last year, I thought Equifax was a company that only does credit monitoring. I now understand that they also do Affordable Care Act. In fact, they are our partners too. But my thing is, it's something that got people and companies to start doing things and sort of, tracking new things or new policies and so on. Mushrooming of things like voluntary benefits. Until prior to this Affordable Care Act, there was no such thing, or rather there were voluntary benefits and critical illness programs, but they were not big in terms of selling. But in today's context, with the whole focus being at the minimum, you can buy an insurance policy which covers the very basic requirement. People are able to sort of buy menu card based kind of plans, which is depending on what your requirement is or what your fears are, you would go buying voluntary benefits and critical illness programs. And similarly related to health optimization and wellness programs, which again were non-existent, let's say 6-7 years ago, or even if they were not so big, whereas in today's context it's becoming a lot more big. On this front, I agree, there is actually innovation that's taking place because of activities that the government has taken. So net, my feel is, generally speaking, the government does cause innovation when they are either pushed to the hill or pushed to the brink, or it is something driven by a political message which sort of spawns innovation elsewhere. On their own, it's not like in a typical Jack Welch-driven company of the past that every year we will go ahead and focus so much on innovation. I don't see that happen.
Thanks. So Venkat, that I understand your company bids RFPs where you build IT-enabled services for the government. The problem with that, with those RFPs, is the government is in most cases required to go with the lowest cost. But if you want to bring in innovation in IT, that comes as a cost to you. So how do you blend that, or do you just say, forget innovation, I just want to win this bid and I'll go, I look at my least cost and just win the bid? How do you blend innovation with cost?
So it's not true that the government will only go for the lowest cost. All that they require is they have a particular methodology of numbering everything and evaluating everything in terms of numbers, as long as you can say that the non-cost factors in whatever form are higher than what. So to put it differently, what's the value you're bringing for the dollar compared to me? So I may be charging you $10, but only giving value of 5. You may be charging